Hi everyone. My name's Mark McSherry and I'm from Virtual School Victoria, and I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'm thrilled to be here today for the first in a series of three composition workshops that sees the expansion of a partnership program between Virtual School Victoria and the Melbourne Recital Centre, which I'm really pleased to say is now being supported by the Victorian Education Department's Strategic Partnership Program and the Hugh Williamson Foundation. And I can think of no better place to be at this time than in a world-class venue, listening to music played by some of Australia's finest musicians, and to also be able to talk about how that music is put together. So this is what we'll be doing. We'll be playing some music at the start. We'll be talking a little bit about how that piece came about. Then we'll talk about how music is created in an ensemble setting in traditional ways and how we might reimagine it, and perhaps even get to the stage of talking about the nexus between composition and improvisation in a world where that improvisation is part and parcel of that music making. And we might have some time for some questions at the end as well. But we're going to start with some music. This is an Andrea Keller piece, who is sitting at the piano at the moment. I'm going to get Andrea to introduce all the band after the piece. But we'd just like to begin with some music, which is the best way to begin anything. This is an Andrea Keller piece called Blip. again, Andrea Keller piece called Blip. I think, Andrea, you might like to introduce the people
Yes,
who might be playing this
definitely.
and more.
Thanks, Mark, and hello, everyone. Oh, here I am. Good. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming along today and all those watching. I'm very privileged today to be playing with Stephen Magnusson on the guitar. Sam, yes, please. Sam Anning on the double bass. James McLean on the drums. And Julien Wilson on the saxophone. And that was a composition that I created a few years ago. I don't know if February 2019, there you go, it's on the score. And I was thinking about these growing and contracting structures. So if you are looking at the score, you can see that it begins in 3 and then 4 and 5 and 6 and keeps looping through those. And then at the very end in the coda, it actually descends through those 6, 5, 4, 3. So it was about that rhythmic expanding and contracting, and also, of course, the pitches in the line expand and contract as well. And when I first brought it to a band that was pretty much this bunch of people, I had a different idea about how it might go, and I thought that we might play that and then improvise off it the way we might in a more traditional sense, where we might use the chord symbols and the form and take solos and various things like that. But it ended up being really difficult to hold down that 3, 4, 5, that changing time signature thing. So then we came up with a scenario where the melody was always being played and only certain members of the ensemble actually improvise on top. And of course the drums, with all the rests in there, the drums have a lot of opportunity to solo or do fills or that kind of thing. So it's a really simple structure. And the arrangement of it grew out of necessity, really, of rehearsing it, I think, on the night of the gig at the sound check and then going, okay, that's not going to work, so why don't we try this solution? And it's actually been really enjoyable to play it like that, so it's stayed like that ever since.
Can I just one final? What is the kernel of that? Is it simply the idea of reduction in there? Is that what you're trying to explore there?
Yes, augmentation and reduction. And it actually, the motif itself grew out of an improvisation. I was doing a daily free improvisation practice. And one of the ideas that I was playing with, which came through some research I'd been doing, was this idea of serial amplification and reduction, so incrementally increasing or decreasing ideas. So in my improvisation with that motive, I was doing that in a free sense, but of course when you're improvising, it's not a precise thing, it's more an impression of things growing, and they're not as systematic, or not when I do it anyway, it's a little bit more haphazard or random. But then I really liked that idea and I made a note of it, and then when I was writing the tune, I thought I'll take that idea and I'll formalise it. I'll make it really rigid and precise now that it's a composition.
Perfect explanation. And just the idea of the composer getting the idea and then working it and going to the next stage. I'd like to actually hand over, if I might, to a good friend and colleague, Dr. Tim Nikolsky, who's going to lead the band through a few other things and maybe look at how an ensemble like this actually works a standard or a jazz standard. Tim.
Thanks very much. Great to be here. Okay, so we are going to move on to the next part of the crux of what we are doing today. We're going to look at reinterpreting a jazz standard. Jazz standards have effectively become a skeleton. They are just communicating enough, but not too much, and it's often a fine balance. So we have this very fine skeleton of melody and chords. So we are going to collectively workshop that today on a classic jazz standard called All the Things You Are. And can I please invite Andrea and the Andrea Keller Ensemble to play All the Things You Are in a straight style, so straight ahead style, not straight cravers, in a straight style.
One, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much to the Andrea Keller Ensemble. I love that even when I asked them to play something straight, this group of improvising musicians can't help themselves by being themselves from after a very, very short amount of time. Jules, I might start with you. Could you talk about how you go about playing the head, please?
When I learn a tune, I love listening to Frank Sinatra because he sings the melody exactly the way it is on the page. If I listen to a lot of saxophone players or Billie Holiday or something, I might find it very hard to find the melody. But with Sinatra, it's almost as it's written down, and you can still tell it's Frank. It's amazing that he doesn't vary the pitch or the rhythm or the words, but he's distinctive still.
Sorry for interrupting. Is it a conscious decision that you are? How would Frank sing this, and that coming through the horn?
I think about that simplicity. So that's what I tried to do, is just, this melody is really interesting because it is the major third or the minor third of every chord.
Yep.
And on every bar, there's a third of the chord on the downbeat. Basically, that's the melody for the tune. You could just play the thirds on the chord and it'd be very recognisable as a song. So I tried to play that just like that, but it didn't last long. There's a great 10-step method by the great saxophonist Lee Konitz, and he talks about playing it like that Frank Sinatra way, exactly as it is. And then the second step is just a little bit of variation. And the third step is more variation, and the fourth step might be playing off the beat or playing a couple of approach notes to the melody, and it goes on and on until you're playing a counter melody and singing the melody in your head. And then the 10th step he calls an act of pure inspiration, which is sort of just based on the song but not really playing the melody. So as we went along, I started to stray from it. That's why I let Steve go first. Bring me back to reality. Thanks, Steve.
But it seems that you are perpetually straddling that point of exercising restraint by keeping it simple, going out, being more adventurous, but then bringing it back in as well.
That's the game.
That's the game.
Yeah, that's where the fun is in the music, is pushing it and stretching it and moving it around. And one thing I really like to do is play a little before the chord. So then I can just sit and wait for the band to catch up or respond, or it opens a more conversational way of playing. If I get there early, and then I can leave space, which with my instrument, that's something we're not very good at, is leaving space.
James, I might move on to you if I could. Playing time is a deceptively easy and also difficult thing to do. Can you perhaps explain your approach in that particular example of where you were placing the time, whether you're pushing, pulling, how are you hearing the time, and what do you think your role is in this ensemble in that push-pull relationship?
Sure. I guess the first thing is, we set it up by saying this would be a straight ahead style. So for me, that means like my kind of instinct with that is to be very clear with the time compared to maybe what we heard at the start or what we'll hear a little bit later. So, very clear and not deviating too much. So that's the first thing to say. In terms of pushing, pulling, playing around with it, I'm listening to all of the band, but particularly trying to tune in with the bass. So probably pretty noticeable that right from the start, not the introduction, sorry, but from the start of the melody, there was a two feel. So trying to play with that, which kind of has a different way of phrasing, playing more beat 1 and 3 in line with the bass, and in general kind of a more open, probably leaning back on the time a bit more relaxed in feeling. And then when we slipped, particularly in the solos, into that 4 feel, all crotchets, that becomes naturally a bit of a pushier sound and pushy feel. Within that, I guess there's a little bit of responding to soloists and the intensity generally, as the intensity built throughout, particularly probably from the guitar solo to the saxophone solo, it probably got a little bit maybe more ahead on the beat, but I'm probably not thinking so much I'm going to play 5% more up on the beat, but just more bringing the energy up in response to what's happening. Yeah.
And listening and responding to what's going on around you.
Yeah, exactly.
Sam, I might ask you about the time. Is it an instinctual thing in the relationship with the drummers that you play with, how you go about deciding, to walk for? Is it just, a little bit of an eyebrow raise, or how do you negotiate that in real time without any verbal communication?
Yeah, it's a combination of both musical cues, or audible cues, and visual cues. Like, I think there's certain moments in the music where, especially with the bass and drums, and with the accompanying instruments, where there's a little moment we look at each other and just making sure that the arrangement is like, what are you going to do now kind of moment. There's like certain intersections we get to, like the introduction going into the melody. It's like, oh, is melody happening now? And we sort of like nod each other, like you can kind of convey a lot of information through your eyebrows. And sometimes it involves, just calling out like head, or you do this, right? Like little visual cues can really help the arrangement just glue together, because nothing sounds better than the band going bang all at once, So yeah, it's instinct. It's having listened to a lot of music, and we all have a lot of the same repertoire. We have a lot of common language. So yeah, I think that's sort of where all that comes from.
I know we're talking specifically about composition in this workshop, but I can't help but think that, in an ensemble context such as this, what's actually happening is that there is a whole lot of non-verbal communication that can't actually be effectively written down or documented on sheet music notation and then communicated, via those means. It's almost like this ensemble actually relies upon the relationships that exist between people and being able to communicate in non-verbal ways, and also through the gestures that they're playing and their physical presence, and taking those cues to, build up in intensity, or, if Jules is really going for something, you can both see that and hear that. Andrew, you might just talk briefly about how you go about communicating with an ensemble and how you negotiate those things whilst it's happening.
I mean, it's just familiarity, I suppose. Like, the more playing you do and the more gigs and the more rehearsals, you're building a way of communicating. And it might be specific to the people that you're playing with, but it's not going to be exclusive in that situation. Certain ways of cueing and protocols that Sam was talking about, like we've all listened to a lot of the same music, so there's certain protocols in the music that we kind of adhere to, like we're not slaves to them, but so there's certain things that we're expecting it could go this way or this way, so then the cue, I suppose, is just affirming or going against that perhaps, or suggesting something different. And sometimes we get it wrong, like at the ending, Sam was cueing, so he was communicating something to me, but I didn't get it. I thought it might go somewhere else. Yeah. So we had sort of a little bit of a fudged ending there, which happens, in the music, because we didn't talk about it. I mean, all we said at the start was, should we do the intro or not? And we didn't talk about anything beyond then. So I suppose we're building up a way of communicating, of just being alert, a combination of listening and the visual cues. We're building up relationships with each other, as you said, but there's also, just because we've all also worked with a lot of other people, certain ways of communicating that we've picked up from other people, transport to different situations. So we're just all collectively building on this way of being able to communicate non-verbally in the music. And sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it's a little bit,
But it's on the edge, isn't it? Because that's where the exciting things happen.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, it would have been... I felt like it was important to ask the question, do we do the intro or not? Because we need to know where we're going to start. Like, if someone did the intro and someone didn't, that would be, quite a weak beginning. And it is also a good idea to maybe say how we're going to end it. But at the same time, that just feels a little bit too pragmatic to me. It's like, well, we'll figure it out when we get there. There's a few possible ways it could go. It could go with a rit and a pause. It could go back to the intro as we attempted to do. It could go up a tone and do a little turnaroundy thing, or, there's a few different ways it could go.
But what you're implying at is that there is a whole lot of embodied musicianship that exists, that you can trust, that people have open ears, they can hear what's going on. There's the implied trust that it's a standard tune and everyone knows it because they've played it, and embodied that for many years. So you don't need to refer to the music. It is somehow contained within you that you can have those musical conversations as well. What we might do is work on and workshop this tune a little bit, even though it has been workshopped pretty much straight after the head anyway. Stephen, I knew it was on. As soon as you started your solo, I thought, okay, yeah, we're not straight anymore. We are just being ourselves. Straight out of the gates, it was fantastic. Maybe you could talk briefly about how you go about projecting your voice, your personal voice, over a tune like that. What does that mean on your instrument?
It's interesting when people talk about, when we say it's straight, and when I listen to music, certainly we talk about how we were in the car listening to an interview with Wayne Shorter, and he was talking about Charlie Parker, and, I've been listening to Charlie Parker a lot recently, and I realise how extremely strange it is and how bizarre and how much he stretches these shapes that I didn't realise when I was younger. And so it's interesting when we see, we learn a dialect, a language of negotiating harmonic terrain, or and we in certain musical situations that's how it is. But when you talk about that thing of when I started playing, it's really, I can't do anything else. Like, I really can't. It's as I get older, it's getting harder to even go back to do anything else, and it's almost a bit painful sometimes because I can't do that. Even though I love listening to certain players, but then when I listen to, say, someone straighter like, I don't know, Wes Montgomery, it's not that straight. It's so, there's all that there's a whole lot of glue in that, and incredible musical knowledge and outcome. So yeah, it's a bizarre thing of, like, your job, I think, is to find your way in your life. And certainly in this music, I think it asks you just to find the way that you want to do it. And everyone does it differently, and everybody has their own heroes and copies. There's a rites of passage with that, and I think that, as you get older, you just sort of give up and you go, well, I can only do it this way,
Absolutely. It's fantastic. It seems like the path to finding your own voice could often be, inhabiting, the voice of your idols to a certain point, and then, as you say, you can't do anything else but be yourself. Taking that analogy further, of stretching the fabric of the skeleton of a tune, we might actually have a go at seeing if we can tear the song apart a bit and see how far the fabric will actually stretch. The backdrop of all this, I guess, is really having enough skills in your musician's tool bag, but also your compositional tool bag as well, that you have enough of a range of knowledge of things about how to do them on your instrument, but also how to write them on the page as well. In jazz and improvised music, it's a little bit different in that you could be effectively asked to go down a particular pathway without having so much preparation. So an example of that, to bookend in the All the Things You Are, James, you did like an Afro-Cuban kind of thing, which often happens at the end of that tune. That effectively pulls everyone into that groove and that way of thinking. What if the head of All the Things You Are was in an Afro-Cuban style from the start? So not swinging forward. Could we perhaps try that? So we're trying to apply different musical modifiers to a standard tune to see how far we can push it, to see what things are possible within this context. Great. Okay, that absolutely, yeah, absolutely. That completely makes sense. Thank you for trying that out. Next thing I'd like to try out is one thing that can happen is that there could be like a musical conversation between two melody instruments within playing ahead. What I'd like to do is set up perhaps you, Steve and Jules. Would you mind? I know that you play together in lots of ensembles and have done so for many, many years. Is it possible that you could present that melody in a musical conversation where either one is leading and one is chasing or ghosting? Can you talk a little bit how you go about approaching that or deciding or negotiating that balance?
You want to talk about it together? We could start at the same time. Well, Steve and I have done this a lot, actually. Steve said to me a while ago that I bought a reverb pedal, and he said, I've been your reverb pedal for years. And I realised he just makes me... Anything I play, if I play with Steve, he makes me sound better.
But I kind of do that, where he plays and I just hit it after he's played it.
So we'll make it a little...
But I
lighter,
can't,
we'll
you know, I probably can't do it now.
But we might play... I might play the melody and he might play counter melody, or vice versa. Or Steve might play and I'll follow, or we'll try, and what we often try and do is just both contribute an even amount to the pot of sound in the middle. So the best thing that happens for me playing music is when I stop playing the note and it keeps going and I realise I wasn't playing that note. But it started to feel like, yeah, it's so connected. So let's try all those things. Let's try playing together, let's try counter melody, let's try leading and following and just flip it around like we do.
I think what's really interesting about that is that if you ask an improvising musician to play the head to All the Things You Are, if you ask 10 people, you get it 10 different ways. You ask 100 people, you get 100 different ways. This musical communication and the one voice that happens as a result of these two musicians coming together could only happen between these two people, and that's what makes that interesting and unique. In a compositional perspective, it could be that you actually are writing for specific players and their capabilities and the voice in which they are speaking. Jazz has always had a history of that, but in your writing, having the specific person in mind is often helpful. Andrea, in terms of a harmonic perspective, obviously playing straight is one thing, but to take the scenic route of all the things you are, could you perhaps talk a little bit about how you would go about making it more your own?
Sure. Well, I suppose there's a couple of ways to think about this in practical terms, and one is that there's a series of concepts, harmonic concepts that you can apply, that you might do in practice, where on your own you might sit at the instrument and work through these various concepts and find ways to implement them. But then in a group setting, it's a different practicality, like there's different practical considerations, because in this particular group, we've got the bass and then two chordal instruments comping, and then the horn soloing, or when Julien is soloing, or even playing the melody and embellishing the melody, he'll be implying certain harmonic sort of specifics in that. So, you know, when you're sitting on your own and reharmonise something and looking at some of those techniques, anything could go almost. But in a playing context, you need to sort of limit it a little bit more to what might actually work in that moment with all the people that are making sound, what's actually going to fit. So it might be that I don't take the most adventurous scenic route. Or we sort of do smaller things, like, so for example, just changing the chord quality would be a simple way to do that. So in a tune like All the Things, all the minor chords could be made dominant sharp nines, for example. And if I did that, Steve would hear it straight away and he'd either back off or he'd match me, and same with Jules, and it wouldn't actually affect what Sam's doing. If Sam did a tritone substitution, or I did, so that's another very common harmonic concept that gets used when you're talking about, you know, bringing your own to the harmony. If either of us did it, the way that concept actually works, it wouldn't matter. If Sam played the tritone and I played the original five, it still works, if, you know, vice versa. So there are certain concepts that actually slip in really easily in this situation. There are, so those would be two. The other one that I might just mention, actually, I'll mention a third, because Sam actually did it in the third chorus, or the final chorus. He put the dominant pedals in the bridge. He put the five under it, because the bridge is two sets of 2-5-1s. So he just pedalled the dominant, which obviously changes for 4 bars each. But those sorts of things, I mean, that, when he did that, I wasn't actually playing at that point, I'd laid out, but that's a point where the harmony can stretch out, because all of a sudden the static nature of that bass note means that the colours on top can really change.
I'd love for you to demonstrate that, each of those concepts, if we possibly could. We might, could we start with that pedal idea in the bridge?
Yeah.
And talk about that as a vehicle to access other intensities or other harmonic colours or those sorts of things. Could we workshop that a little bit?
Sure. Well, shall we play an original bridge just so that you can hear it? Mm-hmm. So it's a series of 2-5-1s. What is it? A minor 7, D7, G major, and then F sharp half diminished, B7, E major. So we'll just play it straight, and then the second time we do it, Sam will play the D for the first 4 bars, which is the 5 of that, and then the B for the second 3 bars, because the last chord changes to get us back. But so, yep.
So that pedal provides an excellent point to access other harmonic colours. Perhaps you can talk about those ways into those other colours.
Well, I actually then just applied it really simply. I played the same chords, but I just did a lot more movement within the chords. So, for example, on the G major, which goes for 2 bars, I have a lot of space. So I just ended up treating the G major as a sort of more of a linear thing and was moving the top note around, so creating a little melody in my comping and just harmonising underneath it with any of the notes from G major. So I wasn't just thinking 1, 3, 5, 7. I was thinking in more of a linear concept. So I actually didn't go outside it. I mean, I suppose I could have, but I just chose to create movement through melody in my comping essentially and just harmonising the melody.
Yeah, great. One of your other reharmonisation strategies was to make all of the minor 7 chords as 7 sharp 9s. Could we hear how that sounds?
Sure. So that would be if we just did the first A's, the first 8 bars. So the chords are F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A flat major, D flat major, and then there's a 2-5, a D minor, G7, C. So if we do it, it'll essentially affect the first 2 chords, that F minor and B flat minor. They won't be those anymore. I'll play them as dominant 7 sharp 9. So if you think about that, the minor third from the original chord becomes the sharp 9. So even though if Julien or anyone was playing the melody, which in this instance, as Julien pointed out, will be on the thirds, me putting the major third down the bottom doesn't actually, it just makes it sound a little bit more Hendrix funky.
Can I make
it's that voicing. That.
Can I make a comment on that? Because it's
Yeah.
a really interesting choice that the minor third is the melody note, and you just said this, but you're going to make every chord a sharp 9, which is essentially the same note.
Yes.
But it's like saying, I like the note C, but depending on which note Sam plays, that note C can have 12 different colours or characters to it, even though I'm playing the same note. So it's an interesting thing to take the same note and put it in another context and call it another name.
Yeah.
I'll let you do it.
No, that was well explained though, thank you. So we'll give this a go. We'll play the original 8 as the minors and then I'll put the sharp 9s on. Yeah?
Great.
Idea of the dominant pedal in the bridge, could you just make the first 6 bars a dominant pedal to the C chord, which is bars 7 and 8?
So put G under the whole thing?
Yeah.
Oh,
Just
let's
to
give it a
hear
go.
what it sounds like? I'm
Am I playing
curious.
the original changes?
And
or
you're
the...
playing the sharp 9?
I'm playing the
things, or-
sharp 9s.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, let's give it a go, Jules.
It's getting crunchy.
It is getting crunchy. Here we go.
I mean, I thought you were going to stay on the G at the end there. But this brings up the thing of trust that you mentioned, that when you play with people you trust, and we've all known each other and worked with each other a long time, you hope that if you make a horrible mistake that your friends aren't going to hang you out to dry. Yeah. So if I make a mistake, often I'll just stay on it and hope that Steve can fix it for me. Which he does very well.
So there is, in the setting, there is this appetite for adventurousness, and there is a trust that exists in this ensemble that if someone goes far out, there will be that support underneath and that encouragement to say, yeah, I'm with you. We're going there together. We're not going to hang you out to dry. Embracing that tension and tension, resolution. Yeah, That's really fantastic. It's almost like you can make any of the note choices. Taking the Hendrix chord, you're making the wrong note sound right, just through your relationship with those tensions or those colours. Stephen, you might talk about how you develop your ear and how you relate to those particular colours. Are they colours for you? Are they flavours for you? How do you, in your mind's ear, how do you inhabit those particular choices harmonically?
I love exploring things on this instrument and kind of have for most of my life, and especially the last 30 years of exploring improvised music through, jazz and the harmonic areas that it's kind of, because, being a guitar player, you sort of start in, playing popular music for most guitar players, which I did, and then, sort of entered into that. So exploring on this instrument has kind of, I'm approaching it this way because the cognitive side of it taught me how to hear things. It trained me because I didn't know what that sounded like when I knew that it was interesting when I heard the Rite of Spring, that section where there's that E flat minor section where there's this crunchy chords where it goes like. You're a kid and you just think that is the greatest sound I've ever heard, and then you get the score and then you work out what it is, and then you realise that it's sharp 9 kind of, or diminished E kind of sounds, and then realise that Herbie Hancock does that too. So, it's like a decoding thing. Then in your brain you've kind of processed that and, okay, it's over here. So when I hear someone do it, I can go, okay, that's that. So training my ear kind of, of course there was the intuitive side of training, but I can't talk about that so much. Like the cognitive thing has just been, so harmonically exploring that on the instrument has kind of set me off in that direction, and then also listening to a lot of music, maybe, talking about Stravinsky and then listening to Schoenberg and Ornette Coleman and musicians that explored all this sort of colour was, something that I realised that, Percy Grainger probably checked out too, just as much as,
Totally.
Kandinsky,
Yeah.
colour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew, you might talk a little bit about your role as, providing harmony in conjunction with Stephen being playing harmony as well. Do you alter your approach? Do you maybe do more open voicings? How do you go about negotiating there being 2 chordal instruments in an ensemble like this?
Yeah, it's really tricky territory, for sure. When I'm composing, I will actually have that very much in mind, and will have very specific roles that are distinctive. So in that scenario, it doesn't become an issue so much. But if we're just playing a tune like All the Things You Are, and there's no, we haven't prescribed who's going to do what when, then we have to rely a lot more on just listening and being sensitive to what's going on in the moment, but also not being too polite, because if you're too polite, you can't actually do anything. So you have to sort of stand your ground and follow the, what you're hearing and what you think is the appropriate thing for you to be playing. But you have to do that with an awareness of what what the rest of the ensemble are doing, but in this particular scenario, what the other chordal player is doing. And I don't think I necessarily alter my voicings as such, like playing more open or closed, but I'll think about register more. I'll think about what register Steve's playing in, and so that I'm maybe not trying to inhabit that so much, or I'm trying to spread on either side of it, or things like that. I'll also think about rhythm. If he's playing a very rhythmic and steady sort of pattern, as he was sometimes in All the Things, then I feel freer to just interject with little choppy, rhythmic stabs. But But if Steve is doing more rhythmic stabs, then I feel I have to either play really very simply, like one per bar, or lay out, which I decided to do because, you know, there was such a beautiful sound going on and I just didn't feel like I was necessary in it. So it's, I suppose, a combination of those things, of register, density maybe, like, you know, if Steve's playing very single-liney, just only a couple of notes, then I can be denser. But if he was playing very dense chords, I'd probably thin mine out. And the rhythmic, the placement thing.
Could we perhaps try that? Sorry to give you sax and drums a little bit of a break. If we can try it as a sans drums and sans horn, if we can just play as a trio, just hearing that comping relationship and different approaches to that. Beautiful, thank you. That's really fantastic. Yeah, please.
Can I ask a question there?
Yeah.
Do you consciously avoid playing the downbeat? Because you play a lot of upbeats and four and, both of you. I mean, unless you're playing chunk, 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 and being a part of the actual cogs of the rhythm and spokes of the wheel.
I feel like there's a lot of downbeat going on. It's not that I'm avoiding it. Like, I will play it sometimes to land somewhere, but I feel like there's a lot of downbeat, so...
Well, that's why, because there's a lot of downbeat here, so to me it sounds like the comping is sort of carbonating the music, like it's like bubbles, like everything's going up.
I like
They're
that.
playing the downs and you're energizing the music from within.
We're the bubbles.
Well, it's providing that forward momentum, isn't it? It's sort of defining the time, but it's also providing that momentum that we're on this, on this train of time, and it is moving through the chart. I'm also conscious of the fact that the expertise in this ensemble can deal with just about any kind of musical situation thrown at it. If we were to change up the roles somewhat, Sam, if you were playing the head on the bass with this, how would the rest of the ensemble go about supporting you playing the head? It's fair to say that double bass is not typically the instrument that plays the head. How would you go about playing the melody of All the Things You Are, and how would the ensemble go about supporting you doing that?
Yeah, I think that's more of a question for the rest of the ensemble. But why don't we demonstrate and just see what happens? And I think that that's really the answer. Yeah.
Beautiful. Sam very ably proving that bass can be a melody instrument as well. And thank you for suggesting doing that in 3. Time opens up a whole other set of possibilities. James, if this was in 5, for instance, how would that sound?
So 2 chords per bar? Yeah, 2 chords per bar. Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. The remarkable thing about these musicians is that their toolbox, there is no limit on what they can do. So, Jules, when he's saying, well, 5, well, okay, does 5 mean 3 plus 2? Does it mean 2 plus 3? You know, is it 5/4? Is it 5/8? You know, what kind of context does 5 mean? Does 5 mean 3 beats on the first bar and then 2 beats on the second? So the amount of possibilities that is immediately able to be drawn upon, I think, is the really exciting thing about this ensemble and the music that they play and what they inhabit, and also it relates to the compositional voice as well. So just to recap, what have we had? We've had change in roles. We've had big focus on listening and responding. We've had harmonic explorations. We've had reharmonizations. We've talked about texture. We've talked about melodic interpretation and inhabiting a way of delivering a melodic line. What haven't we covered here?
The blues scale. Or restrictions. Yeah, I got a great friend. I went to study in Boston with a great educator and saxophonist and pianist, drummer, bass player, Jerry Bergonzi. And my friend that was there when I went to Jerry for a lesson when he was 14, and he said, "What do you want to learn?" He said, "What blues scale fits over all the things you are, Mr. Bergonzi?" But I reckon if you could play, let's say, an F blues scale, which is like an A flat major, F minor, which is the key of the tune, and use that as your restriction and just play the notes that work in the chord, you could get through the tune somehow. Could you demonstrate that as a solo for one chorus just using the F blues scale or one of the F blues scales? I guess there's a few blues scales. Controversial? I don't know. Do you want to do it or should I? Okay, I'll do it. Andy, you want to? No. It's your idea. 1, 2, 3.
It's fantastic, Jules. Thank you for proving that could actually be done, and the fact that you can actually make the wrong note sound right as well. It seems that through unlimited possibility of this ensemble and having infinite things in the collective musicians' toolbox about what could be possible, it seems actually really important to provide and supply parameters around your own practice about what you will and what you won't do, and being able to exercise restraint in not doing all the things all at once. Yeah? We might move on to a slightly different sort of topic, but definitely within the Venn diagram. Composition versus improvisation. Andrea, how do you go about finding that balance between the music that you have written and being prescriptive to an extent, and how much do you rely upon the trust of musicians to be able to play and hear what you have in your mind's ear?
Well, you mentioned before about writing for specific musicians and people, and I do that a lot. So, I have various bands, and often I will write a tune for the people in that particular band. It doesn't mean I never play it with other people as well, but it means that the start of it was born, like the idea of it was born out of this very specific set of people. And I suppose in my younger days, I would overwrite things. I found that I was wanting to prescribe as much as possible. But the more I became experienced playing with improvisers, and not just any improvisers, but amazing improvisers, I realised that actually the fun happens when I haven't prescribed too much and everyone is invited to bring themselves to the music, and then we can really communicate. And this music is all about sharing and communicating and dialogue. Those are the things that are really important to me. And also being in the moment and not trying to control the moment, but being very open to whatever happens in it and running with it. And so I started then on this process of, I still compose a lot of music, but I don't feel that I overwrite stuff. I always try and make sure that there's room in the music for everyone to bring their own voice to it and their own input.
It sounds like you have come to a point of acceptance of what happens in the moment, in the act of making the music. You will not only deal with, you will completely accept that as valid, as a valid contribution. That perhaps you can talk a little bit about how you've gone about, making that transition from being prescriptive to just going less is more in terms of instruction.
Well, I suppose I started to learn my lesson a little bit earlier on with this, where I would have a very specific idea about something, about a piece, and I would bring it to the ensemble and I would communicate with them what my idea was, and then something else would happen and I'd realise that what happened was actually way better than what I had thought of. So that was I still remember the particular rehearsal where that really just hit me in the face. And I thought, oh, wow, okay, I need to step completely back. Like really my role in this situation, if I'm going to be the composer and the band leader, is to bring the material that might bring us all together and give us some kind of common message or goal or whatever. So I'm just facilitating that. But really then I need to step back and just let it take whatever, whatever form it's going to take. And I think, the way I am is I will, and I think, we all have this where, sometimes it just doesn't go so well. And sometimes it goes amazing, and even though you were feeling very negative about it at the start. So it's a little bit difficult to predict which way it's going to go. But it's actually from working with people like these people on stage very specifically that I've learnt to go, it's all valid, as you said, and actually you need to be welcoming it all. Like, I remember Steve saying to me one day, I was telling him how disappointed I was about a certain performance I'd given. And he just said to me, well, you brought what you had on the day. And And that's exactly what it is. Like, we always bring what we have. We're always trying our best. We're always hoping for the best, but it's not always going to be the best. So, you know, that's the same with the compositions. Like, I'm not expecting them all to be masterpieces. I don't write them to be masterpieces. I write them as vehicles for collective improvisation for us to communicate and get together on.
But in the act of writing the music, you are allowing the possibility of brilliance, and you're allowing the space and the headspace of the musicians that you're playing with to be brilliant by providing less instruction.
Well, I'm allowing their brilliance to come to the fore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, please.
I can't help but think of like set design. You know, I think, you know, writing for improvisers is more like set design. Like, imagine you have a bunch of actors and you have to design the set, right? You have to make something in this space. And you could prescribe everything. You could paint the walls, you could make, you know, tables and have all chairs and stuff. And you have a certain amount of control over what's going to happen. But then imagine it's just a banana in the middle of the room, right? Just a simple that. And then you have 4 great actors that come in and, you know, Robert De Niro, et cetera, et cetera. And it would be way more interesting to see what they did with just a banana. You know, like, I think there's something in that. There's the simplicity in the design, in the set design, in the, you know, you just give enough and then the imagination goes.
Andrea, can I just ask, in that that creative process, when you're actually opening it for other musicians, what is your actual process that you work through? Do you write it down? Are you aware? Do you record it? Do you record small motives, those ideas? What's that actual physical process?
Well, most recently there's kind of been 2 ways that I've been working. One is, I mentioned earlier about the improvisation, the daily improvisations, and recording those. And a lot of compositions came into my repertoire from that, from taking ideas from that improvisation practice. And at the end of the improvisation, if there was an idea I liked, or 2 chords or whatever, I'd actually notate it, you know. And then it's just in a book, and one day when I've got time, I flick through the book and what ideas have I got, play through them. Oh, that's one speaking to me today, so I'll run with that. So that's one way. And I do write stuff down. Then I would sit at the piano and live with that idea for a bit and think about, you know, who I might play this with and what sort of things I think would be a good part of the map. The other way is that I hear something in someone else's music, like a concept, and I go, oh, that's really interesting. And then I sit down and try and write a tune using that. So it might be pretty abstract, actually, the concept, but it's enough to get my imagination going that I want to. So I sit at the piano with manuscript and a pencil and an eraser and just work like that.
In your current practice, do you ever actually, you know, write everything, like for a string quartet or?
Yes, sometimes I do get commissioned to write fully notated music, but I'm starting more and more to use cells and various things to get those people improvising and to have not all of the onus on me, and actually they have some power and autonomy over the composition as well.
Jules, you've picked up a microphone as if you were going to say something.
Sam and Andrea, the concept that kept coming to me is curator rather than director.
Yeah, curating the music or the musicians.
That's a fantastic point. Before we launch into the explanation of the last piece of music, I thought I might open it up to the floor. Is there any burning questions that people would like to ask?
Okay, so I was thinking with your non-verbal communication, how does the performance space change whether that's possible? Like, have you guys ever had to perform all on stage with masks or something and you can't do your usual sort of facial expressions? Or like, I don't know, you're more spread out, or like the drummers in the little like drummer prison with the insulated and stuff. Like, how do you navigate that?
That can definitely pose some challenges, and yeah, really good point to bring that up. I mean, the mask wearing certainly, and I've been sometimes yelling instructions and realised I have to pull my mask down to actually get the point across. And the thing of visual, it's not everything. It's definitely important, but like Steve and I couldn't see each other, but we could still communicate musically because of listening. But certainly if you're in a recording studio and that scenario you described with the drums being in like a booth and sometimes the bass will be in a booth, that does change things, and all of a sudden you're relying on cans. So then you're just reliant on listening and whatever you can get done in those situations. And maybe in those situations you want to have a bit more of an idea of what the actual arrangement is. You want some more concrete sort of ideas before you launch in.
I think the other thing as well is that it's something we really think about is, when you get to set up on a stage or in a in a studio is like sightlines becomes a big part of what you're actually thinking about, is so that yes, there are the odd occasion where you just absolutely can't and you have to try to figure out something else, but that's, I know it was kind of for cameras as well, but when we got in here, one of the things we were checking before you were all allowed in was like, okay, is there clear, from everyone to each other? And it was kind of fine today, but sometimes you might find that it's like, say, Sam or whoever's playing bass is a little bit forward and they're blocking between piano and drums, and it's like, okay, can you take a couple of steps back? So those things they're practical things that you actually try to sort out as much as possible because they do really affect it when it's an issue.
And I think musical cues is really important, and listening for music. The other musicians may not be able to see you, but hopefully they're listening to you. So hopefully they can catch oral cues. But Steve and I have had a trio with another musician who we've all known since teenagers, and we play open sections and we cue the next section. And over the years, it's come to the point where we cue the next section and we've all got our eyes closed. And we play rubato and speed up and slow down all the time. And I know a lot of people who haven't seen us before or haven't played with us before say, how do you guys do that? It's just a matter of trust, and there might be a little dynamic increase, or there might be a little pull back in the tempo, or a little cue that says, all right, we're going on to the next section now. And you know, as you get to know someone better, you get more attuned to their micro signals.
Any other brief questions before we move on to... Yeah, Tim.
Andrew, I'd love to ask you, you've talked quite a bit about the harmonic sort of approach in terms of techniques. How do you go about voicing a chord when you're in the moment? So if we're taking like an F minor 9 or sharp 9 or some other fancy conglomeration, what do you find happens in terms of your way of thinking about how to play that chord at that point in time?
Well, of course, I and other piano players, and Steve would have as well on the guitar, we've practiced lots of voicings. So through 2-5-1s and around the cycle and through different tunes, and then transposing the tunes into different keys and, keeping these sort of same voicings. But then the more you play and the more experienced you get, you build on that vocabulary. And eventually you get sick of your vocabulary, so you just, you keep trying to expand it. So that's one way that it develops. So I'm not thinking very specifically about what notes should go in this chord. It's all come from that, those early days of just really drilling very specific 2-5-1 voicings and then building on that, looking at transcriptions of other piano players and seeing the voicings they use. And also I mentioned before about with the ensemble, the registral thing, like that's something I think about a lot, like where's everyone playing and where's the space for my sound in terms of register. So if everyone's playing in the mid, I don't want to be in the mid. If the bass is up high, then I don't want to be in my mid. I want to get out of the way. So I'm not so much thinking about the exact notes, but like I said, I'm basing it on those sort of standard voicings that I've worked on, and then I'm thinking about the sound of where everyone's placed and where I could fit. I mean, there are, of course, lots of extensions and alterations, and that's just part of building the vocabulary, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just the note, but it's kind of the colour and the register, and I suppose also how it fits in your hand.
How it fits in the hand and the density. I think I mentioned that before with, comparing the piano to the guitar, and if we're both playing together, like if there's a lot of dense sounds, I might want to play very open intervals and very well spaced. But if there's not that, then playing clusters and really dense things could be really nice to add.
Fantastic. Andrea, would you mind please introducing the last piece that you were going to play, and perhaps you could talk about what you were trying to do with it and the unique structure of it. And I would love to know how I'd love to see how you communicate your instructions to this ensemble, please.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Well, this last piece is called Life is Brutiful. And if you're looking at the score, it took me quite a while to get to this formation of the score. Originally, when I brought this tune to pretty much this band, just a slightly different personnel, I had it all written, there was a score and everyone had an individual part. And it meant that the bass and drum part that you see at the bottom, which is now just one line, it was pages and pages of repeat that 4 bars, with maybe some cues of this will happen, like the saxophone will do this here or something like that. And in my mind, the concept for the piece was very simple, but I realised after that first bringing to the ensemble with individual parts that it didn't translate simply on the page to everyone. They couldn't actually clearly tell what was going on until we'd played it a few times. And so I wanted to find a way of communicating the simple conceptual information that I had in my head, because I know that on a conceptual level the musicians could pick it up in an instant. But I wasn't presenting it in the right way, so it took me a while to get to this. So if you're looking at the score, just to give you a little way of navigating it, that bottom line, straight and tough, time and brutality, bass and drums, the bass and drums are going to play that line. Now, normally when we play this tune, Sam doesn't play that line, but he's going to play it today. So the instructions to Sam and James are to play tough and brutally and play that heavy sort of rocking 5 feel, and that, I don't even have a time signature down the bottom there. Sorry, that's terrible. I need to amend that on the score. But that should say 5/4 for the bass and drums. And there's a bit of freedom within that. Like I want James to be filling and interacting, but also laying down that really slow, heavy pulse. And for Sam, I mean, he's not a complete slave to the figure, but essentially that needs to be there. The idea of this little bit of activity and then stasis and coming in, but always the activity when it's there is really punchy, and then there's a rest. And then the lines that you see on top, the 4 blocks, or the 4 lines, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, Stephen's going to play those on the guitar. So he's going to play, you can see that it says freely, rubato and beauty. So it's a totally different vibe going on here from Stephen. He's going to play those phrases. The first line, each phrase gets played 4 times each. It's rubato and there can be space in between. He can navigate that as he feels is appropriate in the moment. And then when we get to the end of the line, O stands for open. So O1, open section 1. Julien and I will probably play free in there. Anyone else, I mean, the bass and drums can, I don't want to prescribe it too much, so they can keep playing if they want, or they can drop out. They can cue that amongst themselves. So there's a little free moment, and then we'll go into number 2, and Stephen again will play the written line. It'll be 3 times each for each figure, and then another open section. I'm not going to prescribe who plays in the open, we're just going to see. But we keep playing through it like that. Section 3 is the peak. So the instructions to Julien are to perhaps first enter at O1, and that O1 is smaller, and that slowly Julien will have more and more of a presence in the piece until section 3 he's just playing constantly. And the section open 3 or O3, that will really be a peak area that will then come down, I'm hoping, or that's the plan. And then section 4 is very brief, but it's a definite sort of bringing down of the energy. Except the bass and drums can finish it for us. So, and again, I'll leave that up to them to cue it amongst themselves when the last notes are played.
Can I ask one question, because it's not crystal clear? There's 4 bars in the first line.
Yep.
And the first one says by 4 each. So that means each one of those 4 bars is
Correct.
4 times each.
Yes.
Okay.
And then in line 2, each is 3 times each. Each is 3 times each. No, I agree. There needs to be some discussion because it's not like you see music written like this all the time. So, yeah, there are questions, and that's fine. And hopefully, I'll keep, fine tuning my system and my notation so that it becomes clearer and clearer. Is the plan. So we're going to play it now. Here it is. Life is Beautiful. And normally this piece takes quite a while to get through, so we're going to move it because we don't want it to go on forever, even though we enjoy that. But yeah, here it is. Life is Beautiful.
I'm charged with making some thank yous. First off, we'll leave them to last, I think. First off, I'd really like to thank the Melbourne Recital Centre, especially Belinda and Bennett and Vic for today. I'd like to thank Fee Webster and the executive at VSV for always supporting the arts. And especially, and the lovely Dr. Tim Nikolsky for leading us through today. And may I say, we wouldn't be here today without Tim pushing for the last couple of years, I think. And most importantly, these fabulous musicians in front of us. Julien Wilson, James McLean, Sam Anning, Steve Magnusson, and the fabulously wonderful Andrea Keller. Thank you. That's the end of the first composition workshop, known as Making Waves. We'll be back with another whole set of different musicians and different styles in composition workshop number 2. Thanks, everyone.